What if quitting isn't a character flaw, but a predictable psychological pattern? We've all experienced that moment. The project that stalls, the workout routine that fades, the relationship conversation we avoid. The shame that follows can feel like a personal failure. But what if we reframed this entirely? What if the urge to quit when things get hard is actually a signal from our own mind? A deeply ingrained coping mechanism that follows a set of psychological rules. The core question we're exploring isn't about willpower, it's about wiring. Why does the human brain so often interpret difficulty as a command to stop entirely? The answer lies in several evidence-based psychological frameworks that explain this automatic exit strategy. By understanding the mechanics of quitting, from Carol Dweck's research on mindset to Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness, we can begin to rewire our response to pressure. This isn't about blaming ourselves for past quits. It's about understanding the predictable patterns so we can build a more resilient future. To understand why we quit, we need to start with one of the most foundational concepts in modern psychology, the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. This framework, developed by psychologist Carol Dweck through decades of research, reveals how our core beliefs about our own abilities directly shape our response to challenge. A fixed mindset operates on a simple, powerful premise. Talent is innate. You're either good at something or you're not. Intelligence and ability are static traits. When someone with a fixed mindset encounters a difficult task, whether it's a complex problem at work or a new skill in the gym, the difficulty itself becomes a threat. It's not just a hard problem, it's evidence. Evidence that they might not be a math person, or a creative type, or a natural athlete. The challenge becomes a direct test of their immutable identity, and failure is not an outcome, but a revelation of a permanent lack. This is why quitting under a fixed mindset isn't just giving up. It's a form of identity protection. It's psychologically safer to walk away than to risk confirming a negative belief about oneself. You see this in the career pivot that happens at the first sign of criticism, or the creative project abandoned after a single negative comment. The mind's calculation is clear. If I can't guarantee success, then not trying is the safer option. A growth mindset, in contrast, flips this entire equation. Here, ability is not a fixed trait, but a malleable quality that can be developed through effort and struggle. Dweck's research showed that when children were praised for their effort rather than their intelligence, they became more likely to embrace challenges. Difficulty is no longer a threat, it's the very material of growth. The cognitive shift is profound. It moves from "I can't do this" to "I can't do this yet." Think about how this applies to a real-world scenario, like learning a new software program for your job. A fixed mindset interprets initial confusion as proof you're not tech-savvy, leading to avoidance and procrastination. A growth mindset sees the same confusion as a normal part of the learning process, an obstacle to be worked through. This foundational belief is the first gatekeeper determining whether we engage with difficulty or retreat from it. But mindset alone doesn't fully explain the powerful, almost automatic emotional retreat we feel under pressure. For that, we need to look at the immediate psychological reward system that makes quitting so seductive. When faced with a stressful situation, our brain makes a rapid assessment. Is this a threat I can handle, or should I escape? This process, formalized in the stress and coping model by psychologists Lazarus and Folkman, leads us to one of two primary paths. We can engage in problem-focused coping, where we tackle the stressor head-on. Or we can choose avoidance coping, the strategic withdrawal from a stressor to regulate our immediate emotional state. Avoidance coping is incredibly effective in the short term. Let's say you have a difficult conversation looming with your partner. Thinking about it causes anxiety, so you decide to not think about it. You scroll through your phone, you watch a movie, you focus on work. The relief is immediate and powerful. The negative emotion dissipates. Your brain registers a success. Avoidance reduced the discomfort. This creates a powerful negative reinforcement loop. The behavior of quitting or avoiding is reinforced because it successfully removes an unpleasant feeling. James Gross's research on emotion regulation helps explain why this loop is so sticky. We are wired to prioritize immediate emotional relief. When avoidance provides that relief, it becomes the path of least resistance. The problem is the long-term cost. That difficult conversation doesn't go away. It often gets worse. The work project you're avoiding becomes more daunting. The compounding effect is a life of stagnation, where short-term emotional comfort is traded for long-term growth. We see this loop play out clearly in creative blocks. A writer facing a challenging chapter feels anxiety. Instead of pushing through the discomfort, they check emails, clean the house, do anything but write. The immediate anxiety fades, reinforcing the avoidance. But the chapter remains unwritten, and the pressure only builds, making the next writing session even more daunting. The same pattern applies to fitness. The thought of a hard workout is unpleasant, so we skip it. We feel immediate relief from not having to exert ourselves, but our fitness goals drift further away. The tragedy of the avoidance loop is that it works too well. It provides such an effective short-term solution that our brain learns to default to it, especially under stress. But when this pattern becomes a default setting, it can solidify into something even more profound and debilitating, a fundamental belief that our actions don't matter. But what happens when the avoidance loop becomes so entrenched that we stop trying altogether? This is where we encounter one of psychology's most profound discoveries: learned helplessness. Psychologist Martin Seligman's classic experiments in the 1960s revealed a disturbing pattern. When dogs were subjected to inescapable electric shocks, they eventually stopped trying to escape, even when a clear exit became available later. They had learned that their actions were futile, so they simply gave up. Seligman's research showed this wasn't just behavioral surrender, it was a cognitive shift. The animals developed the core perception that their actions had no causal effect on outcomes. This learned helplessness then generalized to new situations, creating what Seligman identified as three fundamental deficits. Motivational, they wouldn't initiate action. Cognitive, they struggled to learn that new actions could work. And emotional, they showed signs of depression. This psychological mechanism translates directly to human experience. Think about someone who's experienced multiple failed job applications. After enough rejections, they might stop applying altogether, convinced that nothing I do matters. Or consider someone in a relationship where their efforts at communication are consistently dismissed. They eventually stop trying, believing their actions won't change anything. This isn't rational calculation. It's an emotional conviction born from repeated experiences of uncontrollable failure. The connection to depression and anxiety disorders is well established in clinical psychology. Learned helplessness creates a cognitive filter that interprets new challenges through the lens of past failures. Why start that novel if your previous writing wasn't successful? Why try meditation if you failed at being mindful before? The mind generalizes the helplessness from specific situations to a global belief about one's capabilities. What makes some people more susceptible to this pattern? Research suggests it's often those with a pre-existing fixed mindset, as their identity is more threatened by failure. But here's the crucial insight. This profound sense of helplessness can sometimes function as a preemptive, self-protective strategy. If you believe you're helpless, you're protected from the disappointment of trying and failing. The psychological tragedy is that this protection comes at the cost of never discovering what might have been possible. This brings us to perhaps the most ironic psychological pattern of all: self-handicapping. Researchers Burgess and Jones identified this fascinating strategy where people actually create obstacles to their own success. Why would anyone do this? The internal logic is perversely brilliant. It's psychologically safer to fail because you didn't try than because you lack ability. Imagine a student who parties the night before a big exam instead of studying. If they fail, they can blame the partying rather than their intelligence. Or consider someone starting a new fitness program who immediately adopts an overly intense routine they're likely to abandon. When they quit, they can point to the unreasonable plan rather than their lack of discipline. This is self-handicapping in action, creating a convenient excuse in advance. Berglass and Jones's research showed that this strategy is particularly common among those with high self-esteem concerns. The need to protect one's self-image becomes so powerful that it overrides the actual desire for success. In career contexts, we see this when someone takes on too many projects simultaneously, ensuring they can't excel at any single one. In creative work, it might manifest as pursuing an impossibly ambitious concept that's destined to remain unfinished. The tragic irony is that self-handicapping often creates the very failure it seeks to avoid. By not studying, the student actually does fail the exam. By setting unrealistic fitness goals, the person actually does quit. The strategy designed to protect self-esteem ultimately damages it through a self-fulfilling prophecy. This pattern is especially damaging in relationship stress, where someone might pick fights or create distance preemptively to avoid potential rejection, only to create the very rejection they feared. What makes these patterns so persistent is that they're self-reinforcing. Each time we quit or self-handicap, we strengthen the neural pathways that make quitting a default response. But these patterns are not unchangeable sentences. They're learned behaviors, and they can be unlearned. The question then becomes, what builds the resistance to break these cycles? What psychological muscle allows some people to persist where others quit? So if these patterns of quitting are so deeply ingrained, how do we build the capacity to persist? This is where Angela Duckworth's research on grit becomes essential. Grit, as she defines it, is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. It's not about raw talent or high IQ. Duckworth studies consistently show that grit is often a better predictor of success than traditional measures of intelligence. Grit operates as a separate psychological muscle that can be developed. The key is understanding that grit isn't about white-knuckling through misery. It's about developing a conscious tolerance for productive discomfort. This begins with cognitive reframing, the practical skill of changing how we interpret challenges. Instead of seeing a difficult workout as pain I need to avoid, we can reframe it as strength I'm building. When facing creative blocks, we can shift from "I have no ideas" to "I'm in the process of discovering ideas." This isn't positive thinking, it's strategic thinking that changes our relationship to struggle. Deliberate practice is another crucial component. Rather than mindlessly repeating what we already know, deliberate practice means working at the edge of our abilities, where we're likely to make mistakes. In career development, this might mean taking on projects that stretch your skills rather than staying in your comfort zone. In fitness, it means progressively challenging your body instead of sticking to the same routine. The discomfort of deliberate practice is precisely what builds competence and confidence over time. The compounding power of small wins cannot be overstated. When we break large goals into manageable steps, each completed step provides a hit of dopamine that reinforces continued effort. Finishing one difficult paragraph of writing, completing one challenging workout, having one difficult but productive conversation, these small victories build momentum. They provide evidence against the learned helplessness we discussed earlier, proving that our actions do indeed produce results. Applied to relationship stress, building grit might mean committing to one honest conversation per week instead of avoiding conflict entirely. For meditation discipline, it could mean focusing on consistency, just 5 minutes daily, rather than aiming for hour-long sessions you'll likely abandon. The strategy is always the same: make the challenge manageable. Focus on the process rather than the outcome, and celebrate incremental progress. This systematic approach builds the neural pathways that make persistence the default response instead of quitting. But beyond these psychological tools, there's a deeper dimension to perseverance that touches on the fundamental human search for meaning. Viktor Frankl, drawing from his profound experiences in concentration camps, arrived at a powerful insight: meaning can be found in any circumstance, even profound suffering. His central argument in man's search for meaning was that our primary drive is not pleasure, but meaning. When we apply this to the psychology of quitting, we see a startling inversion. The avoidance of struggle inadvertently becomes the avoidance of meaning itself. The difficult creative project, the challenging relationship conversation, the demanding career path, these aren't just obstacles to be overcome. They are potential sources of meaning. The struggle is not separate from a meaningful life. It is often the very substance of it. This existential perspective reframes perseverance not as grinding effort, but as a path to purpose. When we quit at the first sign of difficulty, we're not just avoiding discomfort. We're potentially closing the door on experiences that could define who we are and what we value. The musician who perseveres through creative blocks isn't just producing music, they're embodying dedication. The partner who works through relationship stress isn't just solving problems, they're building depth and commitment. The philosophical choice becomes clear. We can see difficulty as something to be avoided, or we can see it as an intrinsic, necessary part of a life lived with purpose. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering, but rather recognizing that meaningful achievements inevitably involve struggle. The resistance we feel isn't a sign that we're on the wrong path. It's often evidence that we're on a path that matters. These psychological patterns, from fixed mindset to learned helplessness, are understandable human responses, not character flaws. But understanding them gives us something precious: agency. True freedom lies in consciously choosing our response to difficulty rather than defaulting to automatic quitting. The patterns can be rewired, and resilience can be built. If these ideas resonate with you, share your experiences with these patterns in the comments below. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next video.